I want to begin with something honest about what spiritual depth actually is. Not the version that looks impressive from the outside. Not the version organized around the right vocabulary, the right practices, the right teachers, the right lineage of understanding. Not the spiritual life as a project or an achievement or an identity constructed around the appearance of having arrived somewhere significant on the interior journey. Gabor Maté spent 50 years observing what genuine spiritual depth actually looks like in a human being and what produces it. And what he found was considerably less dramatic than most spiritual traditions suggest. Less dependent on specific practices, specific beliefs, specific frameworks of understanding. More dependent on something simpler, something more available, something that most people already possess the capacity for and spend their entire lives doing in the wrong direction. Genuine spiritual depth in his clinical and personal observation is the natural consequence of one thing and one thing only: genuine, sustained, honestly practiced presence to your own actual experience. Not the experience you wish you were having, not the experience the spiritual framework you're operating within suggests you should be having, not the performed experience of someone who wants to be further along the path than they currently are. Your actual experience in this moment, whatever it genuinely is, however mundane, however confused, however far from what you imagined spiritual depth would look like when you first began to seek it. The daily practice that deepens spiritual life naturally is not a meditation technique, or a contemplative prayer, or a journaling method, or any of the specific practices that spiritual traditions have offered across the centuries, however genuinely valuable some of those practices genuinely are. It is something more fundamental than any practice. It is the daily, repeated, patient, compassionate willingness to be genuinely present to what is actually happening in your own inner life, and to bring to that inner life the same quality of honest, curious, non-judgmental attention that genuine spiritual depth in every tradition that has ever described it accurately actually requires. Today I want to give you the complete account of why this specific daily orientation, genuine presence to your own actual experience, produces spiritual deepening that no accumulated practice alone can produce. And I want to give you the 7 specific ways this daily orientation expresses itself in ordinary life, not in the extraordinary moments of meditation or retreat or peak experience, in the ordinary ones. If something in that reframe already feels important to you, if you have sensed, perhaps for years, that the spiritual depth you were seeking was somehow closer than the practices you were doing were reaching, drop 777 in the comments right now. 777. The frequency of the one who's ready to stop seeking spiritual depth as an external achievement and begin inhabiting it as an interior orientation. When you type 777, you are saying, I am ready to understand what genuine spiritual deepening actually requires. Type 777 and let us begin. Let me start with what Gabor Maté understood about the relationship between genuine spirituality and genuine psychology. Because in his framework, and this is one of the most important things he ever said, these are not two separate domains requiring two separate sets of practices. They are the same inquiry conducted at different levels of the same interior life. The psychological work of becoming more genuinely honest with yourself about who you actually are and what you actually experience, the work of meeting the shadow, integrating the wound, recovering access to the authentic self, is, in Gabor Maté's understanding, identical in its essential nature to the spiritual work of becoming more genuinely present to the reality of your own existence. The deepening is the same deepening. The honesty required is the same honesty. The compassion required is the same compassion. And the daily practice that produces it is therefore the same practice in both domains, not two different practices for two different parts of the person. One practice applied consistently that deepens both simultaneously. That practice is this: every day, in the ordinary moments that make up the fabric of an actual human life, you turn toward your own interior experience with genuine attention and genuine honesty, and you stay there long enough for something real to be revealed. Now, I want to give you the 7 specific expressions of this daily practice, the 7 ways it manifests in ordinary life when it is genuinely being done rather than being performed. The first expression: you begin to notice what you actually feel before you notice what you should feel. This sounds simple. It is genuinely difficult because most people, particularly people who have been engaged in spiritual practice for some time, have developed a complex and largely unconscious capacity for interpreting their inner experience through the lens of what the spiritual framework they are operating within suggests they should be experiencing. They notice the anger and immediately interpret it through a framework of ego or reactivity. They notice the grief and immediately interpret it to a framework of attachment. They notice the joy and immediately interpret it to a framework of blessing or grace. Gabor Maté observed that this immediate interpretive move, however well intentioned, however sophisticated the framework being applied, is itself a subtle form of avoidance. Because the interpretation, however accurate, replaces the genuine dwelling with the emotion. It converts the raw, direct, unmediated encounter with the actual feeling into a conceptual move that keeps the feeling at a slight but significant distance. The daily practice in its first expression is simply this: notice what you actually feel before you reach for the interpretation. Let the anger be anger, felt fully and honestly, before it becomes a teaching about ego. Let the grief be grief, felt fully and honestly, before it becomes a teaching about impermanence. The genuine spiritual wisdom in every tradition worth taking seriously arrives through the feeling, not around it. The second expression: you become genuinely curious about your own resistance. Resistance, the specific quality of pulling back from something, of not wanting to look at something, of finding reasons to be somewhere else in the moment when something important is asking for your attention, is one of the most consistently mishandled experiences in spiritual life. Most spiritual frameworks treat resistance as an obstacle to be overcome, as something to push through, to discipline through, to outlast through the sustained application of practice. Gabor Maté understood resistance very differently. He understood it as information, as the unconscious communicating in the only language directly available to it that something significant is being approached, something that the system has decided, rightly or wrongly, requires protection. The daily practice in this expression is not to overcome the resistance, but to become genuinely curious about it, to ask, without judgment, what is this resistance protecting? What does it believe is on the other side of the thing it is pulling me away from? This question, asked with genuine curiosity, rather than with the frustration of someone trying to get past an obstacle, frequently reveals exactly what most needs to be seen. The third expression: you practice receiving ordinary moments as genuinely sufficient. This is perhaps the most consistently countercultural expression of the daily practice, because it runs directly against one of the most pervasive assumptions in contemporary spiritual culture: the assumption that spiritual depth is located in peak experiences, in extraordinary states of consciousness, in the dramatic and unmistakable moments of genuine insight or expanded awareness. Gabor Maté was gentle but persistent in his resistance to this assumption. He observed that the most genuinely spiritually mature people he had encountered across 50 years of clinical work shared a quality that had very little to do with peak experience and very much to do with the quality of their presence in ordinary moments. The cup of tea, the ordinary conversation, the unremarkable Tuesday afternoon. These were the moments in which their depth was most consistently visible, not as performances of presence, but as the natural expression of a self that had genuinely learned to inhabit its own life, rather than perpetually passing through it in a direction of something more significant. The daily practice here is the repeated patient cultivation of genuine receiving. The willingness to let the ordinary moment be enough, not in the resigned sense of someone who's given up on more, in a genuinely grounded sense of someone who has discovered that the ordinary, when it is genuinely inhabited, is already more than ordinary. The fourth expression, you bring honesty to your spiritual life rather than performance. Gabor Maté observed something in the spiritual community that he found both understandable and costly. The specific tendency present in every tradition he had encountered toward the performance of spiritual development. The presentation of a self that is further along the path than the genuine interior experience supports. The spiritual vocabulary deployed in advance of the genuine interior state it is supposed to describe. The peace performed before it is genuinely felt. The compassion displayed before it has genuinely become the default. He understood why this happens. The spiritual community, like every community, has social norms and social rewards. And the social rewards of the spiritual community, the recognition, the belonging, the sense of being seen as someone who is genuinely growing, are available through the performance of development, even when the genuine interior development has not yet arrived. The daily practice in this expression is the cultivation of radical honesty with yourself about where you actually are, not where you wish you were, not where your practice should have taken you by now, where you actually, genuinely, honestly are in this moment. This honesty is not a spiritual failure. It is, in Gabor Maté's understanding, one of the most essentially spiritual acts available. Because genuine spiritual depth is not the product of the performance of depth. It is the product of the honest, compassionate, unflinching encounter with exactly where you actually are. The fifth expression, you allow your suffering to teach rather than requiring it to end. This expression of the daily practice is the one that most directly engages the specific territory of genuine spiritual deepening. Because suffering, in Gabor Maté's framework, is not the obstacle to spiritual life. It is frequently its most reliable teacher. Not because suffering is good, not because it should be sought or prolonged, but because the willingness to be genuinely present to suffering, to stay with it long enough for it to reveal what it actually contains, produces a quality of understanding that no amount of comfort can provide. He observed that the most genuinely spiritually deep people he had encountered were almost universally people who had suffered significantly and who had, rather than bypassing or managing or spiritualizing their suffering, genuinely met it, who had sat with their own pain long enough and honestly enough that the pain had gradually, imperfectly, genuinely taught them something about the nature of their own experience and the experience of every other human being they had encountered since. The daily practice here is the cultivation of genuine willingness to remain in the presence of difficulty rather than immediately reaching for the resolution. Not masochistic prolonging of suffering, but genuine, patient, curious, remaining with what is actually present before moving to what will make it less present. The sixth expression, you practice genuine gratitude rather than performed gratitude. Gratitude has become, in contemporary spiritual culture, something of a performance, a daily practice of listing what you are grateful for, a regular exercise in redirecting attention toward the positive. These practices have genuine value in specific contexts, but Gabor Maté observed that genuine gratitude, the specific, felt, interior quality of genuine appreciation for the specific, unrepeatable, completely personal experience of being alive in this particular life, is considerably rarer than the practice of gratitude and considerably more spiritually significant. Genuine gratitude arises naturally, in his observation, from the same source as every other expression of genuine spiritual depth. From genuine presence to actual experience. from the willingness to inhabit the ordinary moment fully enough that its specific quality, its texture, its weight, its complete specificity registers as genuinely and irreplaceably real. The gratitude that arises from this genuine inhabiting is not a decision or a practice or an exercise. It is a natural response to genuine contact with what is actually here. The seventh expression, and this is the one Gabor Maté returned to as the most essential of all. You bring the same quality of compassionate attention to yourself that you aspire to bring to others. This is the daily practice in its most complete and most honest form, because the quality of attention that genuine spiritual depth produces in its most mature expression, the genuine compassion, the genuine non-judgment, the genuine curious and patient presence to what is actually there, that quality of attention is, in almost every case he observed, applied much more readily to other people than to the self. The person who can sit with extraordinary patience with another person's confusion or suffering or ongoing struggle to change a deeply embedded pattern frequently meets their own confusion and suffering and ongoing struggle with something considerably less patient, considerably less compassionate, considerably more organize their own judgment and disappointment and the urgent demand that the self be further along than it currently is. Gabor Maté was gentle and direct in equal measure about this asymmetry. He said, the spiritual life that is genuinely deepening is the one in which the compassionate attention gradually becomes less directional, in which the quality of presence you're willing to offer another person becomes the quality of presence you're increasingly willing to offer yourself, not as self-indulgence, as the recognition that the self is as genuinely deserving of compassionate attention as anyone you've ever tried to help. This recognition, practiced daily, applied in the ordinary moments of ordinary self-encounter, rather than in the extraordinary moments of formal practice, is the foundation from which all genuine spiritual deepening grows. Because the spiritual life that deepens naturally does not deepen to the accumulation of insight or experience or practice hours or the sustained application of any technique, however valuable. It deepens to the gradually expanding capacity to be genuinely, honestly, compassionately present to yourself and therefore to everything and everyone your life touches. That capacity grows through practice, daily, ordinary, unglamorous practice. Not the practice of sitting in a particular posture or repeating a particular phrase or following a particular protocol. The practice of turning toward your own actual experience in the ordinary moment that is actually happening with genuine attention and genuine honesty and genuine care for the specific human being you actually are. That is the practice. That is the deepening. And it is available to you right now, in this moment, in exactly the life you're actually living, which is the only place it has ever been available. And the privilege of a lifetime, the one Gabor Maté pointed toward across 50 years of sitting with human beings at the full, honest depth of their most genuine and most unguarded experience. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not the spiritual version you've been performing, not the version that is further along the path than you have honestly traveled, but who you truly are in this moment, in this ordinary, unrepeatable, completely sufficient present. That is the spiritual life already here, waiting only for the honest, compassionate, daily willingness to inhabit it.